Welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our third Bloomington edition of the Hoosier Life. That's Josh on the other end. I'm Michael, and Josh, we're nearing the end of another, I would say, Amazon-like weather week down in Bloomington. It's been sticky as I could ever remember. How you holding up? You hanging in there?
A little bit. It's just so disgusting to go outside. I walked to class this morning with 75% humidity. With the thunderstorms rolling in, doesn't help things very much.
No, absolutely not. And woke up this morning before the sun, and the temperature was already creeping to the 80s. And I said, well, all right, I guess it's still August in Bloomington, despite what the calendar says. So we're still battling with heat today, and there was a quick 20-minute thunderstorm toward the end of my class today, right before my walk back home. So that was nice to see. Definitely cooled the air down a little bit, but it's back up to being humid. So another week down in Bloomington, a Hoosier football victory that we saw last week. We talked to you guys before that game happened. We're going to break that down just a tad bit, preview this Saturday's mini rivalry, if you will, on mini rivalry week across the Midwest, across the Big Ten, really. We're going to get to that in a second. But Josh, first off, you had a busy weekend in Bloomington, and I for one did not. So we're going to save you for last so we can get kind of more details there with our traditional Bloomington opening segment, kind of talking about what's going down here. Keep you guys updated with student life, any exciting news that's happened. And as I just said, nothing too exciting is going on quite yet. People are still getting settled in. There hasn't been a home football game. There were a lot of home events this past week with volleyball, soccer, and what have you. And we're definitely going to get to that in just a matter of minutes. But already talked about the weather. It's been incredible and in such a bad way. It's so Bloomington, but it's just it absolutely drains you. But secondly, last night, and I swear, I promise, we will not be renaming the show the Hoosier Foods instead of the Hoosier Life. I promise. But last night, I had an epiphany. And Josh, we've talked about this before, but feel free to chime in. Throw out the names if you have them. I don't care if no one's ever heard of them. The epiphany I reached last night was Buffalo's has the best wings in the United States of America. In the United States of America. The AP poll came out this week for college football. I have some questions about that. We're going to get to that later too. But if the AP poll came out with their top wing joints in America and Buffalo's was not number one. Now, granted, I haven't been to a whole lot, but I can't imagine a place that tastes better than Buffalo's. Have you experienced such a place? Because I absolutely have not. And I live in a town, in a city that loves its wings, and there's no shortage of wing joints there.
There's a place up where I live that has some good wings. They call it the Wing Dome. I mean, it's a wing place. It's good. Buffalo's is good, but I feel like if you go somewhere in the South, if you go somewhere in Texas, that's where they really know wings. My dad went to Tuscaloosa when he was back in college, and he said he went to a wing joint there, and it was just they teach you how to eat the wings in one bite. I mean, it's just kind of insane how they do it down there. So I think you maybe have to go stretch out a little bit, but I mean, Buffalo is pretty damn good.
Yeah, don't mess with Texas. And Notre Dame learned that this past week. I won't bring that up. But you don't mess with Texas when it comes to now football and food. Much like Maryland does crab cakes and football, it's a Wedding Crashers reference. Texas does food and football, and they do it well. So I can't argue that right there, although I haven't been to Texas ever really, let alone tried wings from there. We're drifting a little bit off topic, but I just had to throw it out there. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, to my knowledge, it is the best wing place in the United States of America. So that's what I got for this week. And I swear I'm going to try so hard next week to not mention food in Bloomington unless it is absolutely necessary.
It's kind of hard not to mention food. I mean, it's just everywhere you go around here is good. But my week in Bloomington has been pretty interesting. Labor Day weekend, very busy. A lot of people out doing stuff. It's still warm weather, obviously, like we were talking about. But one part of Bloomington I really didn't know until this weekend, or didn't really know much about, was at Bill Armstrong Stadium and the Adidas IU Credit Union Classic. And this event brings in 4 premier college soccer programs every single year. This year was Notre Dame, Stanford, Indiana, and California. All 4 of those teams are ranked. They're really good, and there was some incredible soccer. And I didn't realize just how big of an event this is. This is one of the biggest fall events, sporting events in Bloomington. I mean, there's no really Little Five in 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 the fall season, but this is kind of right up there. I wouldn't even. I mean, it's kind of hard to equate those two, but it's pretty pretty darn close when you're comparing just filling that stadium, because it's not a big stadium, but those stands were full. The students are into it. Soccer in this town is incredible. And I post on Instagram, I was like Soccer City, College Soccer City, USA, because the stands are packed. The fans are into the game. They know soccer well. Indiana's won 8 national championships. So, I mean, they have more championships than the basketball team does. It's one of the most successful sports in Indiana. And it's really quite a showcase that they put on.
Absolutely. And I was catching the end of the Stanford match with my buddies whenever that was going on. I can't remember the exact date. I was catching the end of that and flip between that and the football game. And it certainly looked crowded. It certainly looked like a good atmosphere. It looked like a lot of fun. And I had no idea it was such a big deal. But just given the vibes around campus and the traffic going back here, because I live right by the stadium, there were people there. And it was exciting and it was loud. And, you know, we could hear it kind of when we stepped outside toward the end, we could hear some noise. And it was pretty cool. But Josh, you covered that whole tournament this past weekend. So I kind of have a 2/4 part question here, however you want to look at it. The first and second parts are, tell us how the Hoosiers looked this weekend or this past weekend, and tell us what happened, fill us in, and then what's happening this weekend and how we look going forward.
Yeah, so I mean, this Hoosiers team is up there with the best of them. They're ranked number 4 in the country right now. They faced the defending national champions Stanford on Sunday, like you were mentioning, and they had a 0-0 draw. Indiana went down to 10 men in the first half. Grant Lillard got a red card in the first half. It was pretty hard for them to then try to get a goal later in the game because they were a man down. So yada, yada, yada. Ended up in a draw. Really physical game, really fun to watch. Didn't really want to participate in that game because nothing was getting called, and it was a bloodbath. After the game, Derek Crevison, one of the players for Indiana, came in with a chipped tooth. So that was fun. And probably not for him, but it was just interesting to see. Then on Friday, they beat Cal. They won 2-1. So all in all, it was a good weekend. They started off 3-0-1 for the third time in the past 5 years. So they've been getting off to good starts. But then now moving forward is where it really gets interesting, because Grant Lillard, one of the best defenders in the nation, can't play Friday against Maryland, who is number 5 in the country, projected to win the Big Ten. So that's a big loss for Indiana. They'll probably have to battle that one out, hopefully get a draw out of that one. It could be hard to get a win. But this is a soccer team that has great potential. If you see their name mentioned as we get into the end of November and the beginning of December with the College Cup, do not be surprised at all. This team has the capability, they have the depth, they have the coaching, they have the star power to make a deep run, and the quest for 9 is definitely underway.
I had a little problem with my mic there for a second. But no, the quest for 9 is underway. You said it. That's a huge matchup this weekend against Maryland, coming off an interesting weekend and busy weekend on the pitch for the Hoosiers. And, you know, who knows? They're ranked very highly nationally this year so far. Non-conference schedule is mostly behind them. We're going to, obviously, you said, get into Maryland. Big Ten play coming up very soon. And Josh is going to have updates for us each week to keep you guys posted on the top-tier Hoosiers. So fingers crossed. Hopefully they can bring another national championship back to Bloomington this year. It'll be number 9, like he said. Hopefully that won't be the only banner coming back home this year, but we'll see. They still got to win that first. There's a lot of work to be done. Sticking with IU sports, let's talk a little football, Josh. We talked to everybody last week, 24 hours before kickoff against Florida International. For about 45 minutes, the Hoosiers didn't look so good, and I'm saying to my friends, oh, Lord, it was last year a fluke. What's happening? And then I guess they heard me. Everything switched. Everything changed. And only good things happened in the fourth quarter. 3-possession victory for the Hoosiers on the road. They were the only Big Ten team to win on the road. Granted, it should be mentioned that the only other team that played on the road was Rutgers. It doesn't matter who they played, although they did play Washington. But they were the only other Big Ten team. Very good team. Not where they should not be where they are in the AP poll. We're going to get to that in a second. But they are definitely a respectable program. Rutgers, not as much. But nothing to take away from the Hoosiers. Only Big Ten team to win on the road last week. They looked good. The defense looked good. Richard Lago looked okay. Divine Redding looked all right. He fumbled. Kevin Wilson wasn't happy. We didn't see Chase Dutra. We didn't see Simi Cobbs. We didn't see a lot of the guys. A lot of those guys served 1-game suspensions. Hopefully they'll be back this week. People didn't find out until about an hour before kick, so we'll see. That's just what Kevin Wilson does. I'll start us off here just because I'm already rambling. What to expect this week against Ball State? They're going to run it a lot. They're going to run the ball a lot. I think last week against Georgia State, they ran it 52 times for over 320 yards. Darian Green and James Gilbert are the Cardinal running backs. They combined last week for over 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is going to be a great test for the Hoosier front seven with T. Gray Scales and Jonathan Crawford coming down in the secondary and that new look defensive line and that new look defense. So they did a great job of getting pressure on Magoo, the quarterback for Florida International, last week. I'd like to see them get better. The secondary did a good job of pressing on the short screen passes. I don't think Ball State's going to try and go over the top a lot. So it'll be another good week to kind of practice those screen defenses and packing the box and really stuffing the run. So that's my key for the game is watch the run. Offense is going to take care of itself because Ball State is not that good.
Absolutely, but Ball State has beaten Indiana the past 3 times they have faced off against each other. So that just brings an extra little storyline in this one that should probably be a pretty easy win for Indiana. They play like they did in the fourth quarter, and they play like they did on defense last week, and they bring that to Saturday. This game hopefully should be over by halftime. I would like to see Lego get a little bit more comfortable in the offense. I don't really feel like he had a full grasp of it quite yet. He was kind of indecisive. But as the game moved on, I saw him getting maybe a little bit more comfortable. And that's going to happen. It was his first game on the road too. I mean, you don't really see Indiana go play on the road, especially in the first game of the season. So I feel good about where they are now. I'm glad they had a good fourth quarter like they did, because if they came back and they won by a touchdown or won by a field goal, I don't feel like that win would have felt as good. Obviously a win is a win, but against a Florida International team that you should really have no issues with. It was good to see them get a 3-touchdown win. But now moving to this week, you said it. They have a great running attack, and Indiana is going to have their work cut out for them, especially with their front 7. I guess it's a front 6 with that Husky position in there. Marcelino Ball did have a really good game, so that'll be interesting to see how that kind of position works itself out. But my key to this game is get out to a fast start. You should not have any issues with Ball State, like you shouldn't have any issues with Florida International. But if it takes this team 3 quarters to get into the game and then they win by 21, then so be it. But I'd like to see them get out to a fast start. I think that'll help the confidence of Lego. It'll help the confidence of Divine Redding, because Kevin Wilson said his spot is not solidified at this point because of the fumbles. So I'd like to see Divine Redding get some confidence there. But he did have a good game last week. But it's just get out to a fast start, stop the run, and really shouldn't be too many issues in this one.
And another thing on Divine Redding, what I noticed last week is he's a short but not a small guy. He's not huge by any means. He's not Mike Tolbert. He's not even really Jordan Howard in terms of size. But he's still a pretty big dude, not necessarily a bruiser, but still big. He looked so much faster and quicker last week than any game I saw him play last year. Last year, when he came in against Ohio State, he busted that run on Rutgers. Those were my 2 kind of biggest takeaways from his season last year. I noticed, I'm like, I don't know what he's going to be. And he kind of quietly crept up to over 1,000 yards on the year. And all of the whole season, I'm questioning, how is he going to fare next year if Jordan Howard decides to go to the NFL? And he did, and I said, okay, I don't know what to expect from Divine Redding. But what he did last week was show that he's got speed, and he's got great lateral quickness, and he's quick in between the tackles, and he's got quick feet. I was very impressed, and I think this guy could put up better numbers than Jordan Howard would have been on pace for last year. I hope he can beat Jordan Howard's numbers from last year, because Howard missed almost half the entire season. But I think he should be well on his way to putting up some incredible numbers. He had a good week last week, and that's only week 1 with Lego's first week. So we'll see. But I just want to say Divine Redding really turned heads last week in this household, especially because of that speed that I think he even improved on last year. And he wasn't slow to begin with.
Absolutely. No, I mean, there's still plenty of room for these guys to grow. It's the first game of the season. And Divine Redding, he did have a lot of chances last year to get it into the offense because Jordan Howard was hurt, and now it's time for him to kind of take it to that next level and really. I mean, you don't need to be Jordan Howard and you don't need to be Tevin Coleman, but you need to kind of find that niche of kind of who you are and kind of where you can take this team, because this program has had some great running backs lately with Tevin Coleman and with Jordan Howard just in the past 3 years. So it's time now for Devine Wrighton to take this role and move on with it, because he's a junior this year. I doubt he'll go to the draft, so he's going to have another year here in Bloomington for him to even take that to another level. So I'm really interested to see how his progression kind of takes him throughout the year. But what I'm most interested in is Richard Lego, and is he going to get a good enough grasp on this offense to really I mean, you don't need to have the same numbers that Nate Sudfeld had last year, but you still need to have at least a decent offensive game. He was 18 for 27 for 240 yards and a touchdown. I'll take that. But that's not really the Indiana offense that we've seen in the past, and I don't know if that defense is good enough to hold Big Ten teams to 20 points, because that's all Indiana really scored on offense. I think it might have been even less than that. So this offense is still a work in progress, and they're going to really need to figure this out in the non-conference, because then you start the gauntlet of Michigan State and Ohio State. So you better get things going here pretty quick.
Absolutely. And one other quick thing I wanted to say. The Simi Cobbs' absence last Thursday actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I've been a huge Nick Westbrook fan since last year. I don't know if I called him out last week on the show, but I've been all over him. I've been super high on him. And he came in and he stepped up. He's kind of like a Simi Cobbs, but I would say with a little bit better hands, and he's got good speed as well. He stepped up and he had the most receptions last week on the team for, I think, maybe 60-something yards. And he was the leading receiver, and he looked great. He was the best receiver on the field. So when Simi Cobbs comes back, assuming that's going to be this week, pending another surprise from Kevin Wilson, who knows what he's got in store for us this time. But when Simi Cobbs comes back, that's two downfield threats right there, two downfield big guys, along with Ricky Jones, who's kind of that fly route guy, that fly route specialist, if you will, and then Mitchell Page in the slot. They are loaded on offense. So once that, like to your point, once they get that quarterback situation, once Lego kind of settles in and gets things figured out and gets on a roll, this offense is going to be so much more dangerous than they were last year, because Lego's got an absolute cannon for an arm. They have better receivers and more experience at the receiver position this year, and more running backs to go around. So I think this offense could be, I don't know if they're going to be, but they certainly have the potential to be more dangerous than the last year's. That's just, I had to throw that out there, because Nick Westbrook coming up and showing that confidence really means a whole lot to this offense.
Absolutely. That was you said it. It definitely was a blessing in disguise, because I don't know how many people were really talking about Nick Westbrook all that much, but that was a really good coming out party for him. But the Hoosiers really lost a big piece to this team, and that's Jordan Fuchs. He's probably out for the season. He had a dislocated ankle. So now Indiana uses those tight ends pretty significantly in that offense. So now Danny Friend's going to have to step up. Ian Thomas is going to have to step up. That'll be something to watch moving forward here.
Yeah, and they have a couple guys at tight end that can step up, and it certainly doesn't hurt, excuse me. Like I said, they've got that strong receiver core. So that's what we've got for in terms of football, a good win last week. We're not going to take anything away from the offense or defense there, although the defense stole the show. They've got to prove themselves, both sides of the ball, offense and defense, this week against Ball State, which is a fun little in-state rivalry. I think some of my friends from the state of Indiana are getting very, very into that. They must have friends at Ball State that are getting kind of cocky, because the Cardinals have won the last 3 meetings, including the most recent one, which I think was in Lucas Oil. So the Cardinals have won the last 3. We'll see where that goes. Hopefully we can reverse the fortune there. And if you're coming to Bloomington from the game, or to the game from around Indy, check traffic. I think the Crimson Quarry tweeted out a little traffic guide, because 37 and I-69 are absolutely terrible. There's a lot of construction, and the traffic is a bit ridiculous. So check out the Crimson Quarry, what they tweeted, and just search traffic coming from Indy to Bloomington, because if you're coming, you're going to want to leave earlier and find a different route. So just had to get that little PSA out there. So we're going to debut our Bloomington edition of the Uninterrupted. It is the exact same as it was over the summer. There have been no changes. We just haven't done it since we got back to school, trying to get a feel for the new schedule. we're both sticking to sports here, both outside of Bloomington. Josh has got something that actually came out today. So, Josh, why don't you – yours is more news relevant, I would say. So let's have you start off for this one.
All right, sounds good. So I'm sure as many of you saw, Tim Tebow is now a baseball player. That is a terrible decision by the Mets, by Major League Baseball, that a team would actually want to sign him. I mean, sure, he's going to be he has the ability. He is a great athlete. He's ripped. He's a big, good athlete. But what you are doing and what you are sending a message about is that these players who are coming up in the minor league systems have worked so hard to get to where they are, and then you get Tim Tebow, and one afternoon in Los Angeles at the end of August, you get Tim Tebow trying out for 28 MLB scouts, and I just have a really big issue with that, because there's college players in general, or players coming out of high school that get drafted and they get thrown in low A or rookie ball down in Arizona or down in Florida, and they really don't get paid all that much. They don't have a chance to really get out of there because it's such a grind. You're on buses, you're on long bus rides to games. The schedule's terrible. The food you eat is just not good. You're eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Taco Bell most of the time because the budgets are just nothing down there. And this just sets a bad precedent. I know there's been players like Bo Jackson who have done that, but that's Bo Jackson. He's once-in-a-lifetime athlete. Tim Tebow is not the next Bo Jackson, and I just have an issue with Tim Tebow trying to go out there and play baseball. Sure, he's a good athlete, like I was saying, but I just have an issue with this. It's just there's just too many wrong things about this. He had a successful football career. He's now working for ESPN. Just leave it at that. You're a football guy. That's fine. Everybody will still appreciate what you did in Denver. You got them that win over Pittsburgh. But now going to baseball, I just really don't like it.
I'm kind of with you there. I don't think it's a cool story. It's new. It's definitely newsworthy. Colin Cowherd actually had a scorching hot take on this morning, so go check that out. It's absolutely worth your time. But no, I'm with you. This kind of makes me uncomfortable because Tim Tebow, first of all, I wasn't there at his workout with these MLB teams, but I saw clips, and he wasn't making great contact with the ball, and he was working with high 80s fastballs, and he whiffed every single breaking ball, it seemed like. He was catching fly balls with two hands, which guys stopped doing that their sophomore year of high school. Granted, he was an all-state baseball player in high school, but, I mean, he hasn't played in a decade, and he's going to walk up, and it's with the Mets. He's not going to the Braves or the Brewers. He's going to the Mets, a team that right now is in the playoffs. So I don't know. I mean, obviously you have no idea how to judge this until he gets in the minor league system and he gets out there in some games, and we'll see how he fares. But I'm with you. I don't think this is going to end well just because he doesn't have experience that these other guys have, and it really goes a long way in the baseball and professional sports world. So we'll see how that plays out. And ESPN had a tweet earlier that they were like, Tim Tebow is now in the category of Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, Michael Jordan. This is just so disrespectful. Michael Jordan, the best basketball player to ever walk this earth, and it will forever be that way. One of the greatest athletes ever, was not a good baseball player. And here we're going to see Tim Tebow, a guy who can't throw a 12-inch football 10 yards accurately, is going to throw a ball about this big into a guy's mitt from 200 feet away. Absolutely not. But I digress. I'm going to continue the ranting mood here a little bit, talk about some college football. The overtime rule in college football has officially driven me over the edge of frustration. I mean, they're giving it's just so taboo at this point. I almost feel like I'm wasting air talking about it, but something needs to be done because it's absolutely terrible. I mean, if I were a Notre Dame fan, to have my season end because Texas has a quarterback, that is too large to be tackled and also has good feet, I would be out of my mind right now. I've had my team lose in overtime multiple times. I can't get over the fact that teams start on the 25-yard line. Move it back to the 50 for crying out loud. Don't give them the ball in field goal range to start out. Again, so taboo, so basic. I can't believe I'm explaining this to people listening right now because I'm sorry if I offended you and made you feel dumb, but I seriously can't wrap my head around who can continue to watch these overtime games and say, you know what, this is good for our sport. This is making it look good. This is more exciting. This decides the fair winner. I think it's just absolutely terrible. It's not exciting at all. It could end in 2 plays. Okay, I take that back. It is exciting. Josh gave me a little look there. It is exciting, but it would be far more interesting from a fan standpoint and more satisfying if you won the game and less frustrating if you lost, more heartbreaking, which is what sports are supposed to be, excitement and heartbreak, not frustration and relief. Is move the ball back, take them out of field goal range. I don't care if you move them to the 40, the 50, or your own 25-yard line. Just get it out of field goal range, and then we can go from there. And the NFL tried to change their overtime, and that didn't work very well. Just get the ball out of field goal range, and you will already have the best overtime rule in the world of football.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one, because I find it so exciting when, so I'm taking it that you watched that Super Bowl when the Broncos played the Panthers. That was the biggest defensive battle ever in a Super Bowl. Maybe not ever, but in the past few years. And people thought that game was boring, just boring. And now if you're going to put two teams on the field in scoring position, that is just it's exciting, and I kind of I've been going back and forth with this, but I'm kind of leaning towards I like how they do it. It's almost like penalty kicks in soccer, and I can tell you that I'm not really a fan of that. But in football, it's different because so many things can go wrong. You could have an interception, you could have a fumble, you could have a missed field, you could have a pick six. There's so many different things that can happen, and so many different variables that go into it. And the strategy of going on defense first, and then I kind of like how they do it, but I will say if they did move it back to out of field goal range, I would be perfectly okay with that, because giving a team 3 points is probably not the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying involve kickoffs. I'm not saying, move them back to their own goal line, because that's asking a whole lot. But you did bring up a good point there, and I want to ask you about this. I was going to throw out penalty kicks in soccer, but you beat me to it. You said you're not a fan. This is pretty much the same thing. There's so much more to the game than kicking it from 18 yards out, trying to beat the keeper, who, by the way, is just guessing which direction the ball is going to go. In football, there is far more than playing just red zone defense. It takes out, putting the ball at the 25, takes out a lot of the play calling strategy. All you got to do, if you've got a good running back and a good offensive line, you're going to run it 3 times in a row, play action, and if you haven't scored, then you're inside the 5. So if you have a good running back and a good offensive line, you already have the one-up in college football overtime. And in soccer, if you've got the best goal scorer, the best whatever you want to call it in the world, you already have the one-up. There's just so much more to it than 18 yards out and red zone offense and defense. So I'd like to see, because the coordinators, all they have to do is just call basic plays, one-trick play, game's over. And I'm going to give you 2 examples. You gave the Super Bowl last year was boring, so because there was not a lot of offense. The overtime game on Sunday was 47-47 going into overtime, or not going into. Yeah, was it? Was that the score? Maybe
I don't remember exactly. I was like writing my game story.
it was a lot to a lot. I'm going to say that both teams ended with, I think, 40 plus. There were a lot of points scored in that game, so I'm not wrong there. Another example for the convert, and team scored and the game ended on 2 scores. So the converse, I was at the Northwestern versus Michigan game in 2013. It was 9-9 at the end of regulation. It went into 3 overtimes, and each team scored every time they touched the ball in overtime within like 3 or 4 plays. So even in a game like that where there were no touchdowns in all of regulation, you throw them at the 25 and they walk into the end zone. I mean, those were teams in 2013 that couldn't find the end zone to save their life. So I'm spitballing here and there. I'm getting very off topic, but I just don't understand how people can say there is not a better – it's not that this isn't a good idea. Some people may actually think it's a good idea. But there's no way that you can tell someone with a straight face that this is the best possible option for overtime, because it's just not. It's that simple.
No, I agree with you on that point. I do not think it's the best way to do it. I do believe it's the most fun way to do it and the best way to keep fans into the game, especially if it goes – because, I mean, these football games are 4 hours mostly. I mean, it's an average of about 4 hours. So I don't know if this is a way to just end the game quickly or something like that. But I mean, it's very entertaining. But if they moved it back to like the 50, somewhere around the 45, maybe somewhere around there, I'd be much more better off. I'd be better off with that.
Exactly, and the more strategy becomes involved with the play calling and everything, and it becomes a game again instead of just kind of a chess match between offensive line, defensive line, running back, linebacker, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. So this has been a good discussion, but we have to move on to our weekly power ranking segment. So we're going to stay on topic here, and we're going to give the AP poll came out on Tuesday, I believe, and we're going to do our top. We're not going to go all 25 because, I mean, that would take us till midnight, and I've got a big test tomorrow. But we're going to give our top 5 in reverse order so far that we've seen through just 1 week, but it was a very, very telling week 1. I think the men were separated from the boys, if you will. So I'll start off because I think a game that illustrated that was Houston versus Oklahoma. And I did not watch every play of that game. I'll come clean. But from what I did see, Houston looked like the big brother. I mean, they dominated almost every facet of that entire game for almost every second, including that kick 6, which was awesome. And they looked impressive, and they looked like the better team from start to finish, basically. And Greg Ward is as legit as anyone right now. So far, he's a Heisman contender. The only other guy that put up some numbers was Nick Chubb. And we're not going to nitpick here and there because, it's still week 1, like I said. But for right now, Houston has done enough, if not more, to prove to me that they are top 5 and maybe college football playoff worthy because I talked about it last week. If there's a year for a Cinderella, quote unquote, to get in, it is this year with Houston, and they can start by beating Oklahoma. So now they got to root for Oklahoma to beat Ohio State next week and all that. But for right now, Houston's my number 5.
You know what? That is an absolutely great pick because that is the same one as me. Houston, I did watch most of that game. Houston, you absolutely dominated that game. I mean, Oklahoma was in it at the beginning, but once they got that pick 6 or that kick 6, and then, I mean, and there's some other really good just receptions, just really good catches along the sideline that moved drives along. And Greg Ward, like you said, he's a Heisman candidate, no doubt. And this is big for Houston because that was a neutral site game. It was in Houston, but it was at, I don't know what they call it anymore, NRG Stadium, wherever the Texans play. But they are trying to get into the Big 12 right now. And that game right there, I mean, that can only help them, I would think, because they filled that stadium. I mean, I think there were more Houston fans there than there were Oklahoma fans. I know that's easy because it was in Houston, but they filled that stadium. They were loud from the first kick to the last whistle, and it was a fantastic game to watch. It was crazy because I didn't think Houston would be able to keep up with them for that long, but they did, and they routed them. It was an incredible performance, and getting into that Big 12 now, it makes it a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and say what you want. They took out the de facto Big 12 champ. I know there's a lot of argument always on who the real Big 12 champ is, but the reality is Oklahoma was the best team in the Big 12 last year. Houston, in a neutral site game, you can say what you want. It was not a home game because there were a plethora of Oklahoma fans there. It was not a home game for Houston, despite the city they played the game in. They played in a neutral site game, and they thoroughly beat the Big 12 champs that were in the college football playoff last year. So that Houston, that's enough talk for Houston right now. We love them, but they still have a lot of work to do. My number 4, I was splitting between this team and another Big 10 team. Both routed their week 1 opponents at home, but I went with Ohio State at 4 over Michigan for one reason and one reason only. I know, to me, Jabril Peppers is the best defensive player in the entire country. The guy is absolutely ridiculous. He may be even the most talented player in the country. But we're not going to go there. But J.T. Barrett taking the reins for Ohio State and Mike Weber at running back. The only problem Ohio State had last year was their quarterback play. And I personally think that was because after every single down, Cardale Jones or J.T. Barrett was looking back over their shoulder to say, am I coming out? Because the next guy in line was just as good and just as effective as you, no matter if your name was Cardale Jones or J.T. Barrett. Each guy could have affected the game in such a great way for their team. Now that Cardale is gone, I think J.T. Barrett, he knows this is his team. Everybody knows this is his team. And he can kind of continue what he did in 2014 before he went down in that Michigan game. So I think now that he's got the reins as the team's the quarterback, I think that they can really, really run with this, and they're now my pick to win the Big Ten. So that's Ohio State at 4.
Interesting. I think that's a very good point with their quarterbacks. But one team that really has a quarterback spot solidified, that's a good segue right there, Clemson. They did not play all that well. Clemson is my number 4. They didn't play all that well against Auburn. It was on the road, hostile environment, late at night. That's fine. They still got out a win. It wasn't pretty, but I think that's okay. But Clemson is a team that is in an ACC conference. It's going to be them and Florida State. That's going to be an incredible matchup when that happens. So right now, Clemson is my number 4. I didn't really watch much of that game, but from what I saw, I mean, I think Auburn had a Hail Mary attempt or two at the end of the game. So they didn't play great by any means. They still got a win against an SEC team. It's always big when the ACC beats the SEC because the ACC always seems to want to get into the SEC. But Clemson is right now is my number 4.
Yeah, Clemson's my number 3, and I honestly should have put them at number 4 because watching that Auburn game, first of all, the Auburn defense, if that's any signifier of how they're going to play this year, they're going to be unbelievable because they played fantastic. I mean, Clemson, there were times where Clemson couldn't move the ball, and there were times where Clemson was kind of scratching and clawing to continue drives, and Auburn would just pound them. And Auburn had, I think, 2 dropped pick sixes, sure pick sixes, and they should have caught that first Hail Mary attempt. So Auburn, in reality, should have won this game. But their offense, the Auburn Tiger offense, I've got to specify which Tiger, the Auburn Tiger offense was as bad as I've ever seen it. It was terrible last year. Jeremy Johnson was awful. Sean White was awful. As far as Auburn goes, I'd like to see more of John Franklin, the running quarterback, who didn't play a whole lot, but he looked all right when he did play. But Auburn's offense was absolutely dreadful, and Clemson should have lost that game. Now, Clemson didn't look too bad. They just couldn't finish off drives. That was the main thing. So I don't know what that says. If Auburn didn't look great, although defensively they did, and Clemson barely won without looking that great. They looked fine, but not great, not terrible. So I don't know what that says of Clemson, and this is only week 1. So when they play Florida State down the road, and when they keep playing these ACC teams, it's going to go to show what they're made of. But I was not really impressed with Clemson at all. Deshaun Watson looked all right. He didn't look bad, but he did not look like the Heisman winner.
Absolutely, and it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of rebound, or what happens once they get into ACC play. But for right now, my number 3, I'm going with Ohio State. You had them at number 4. When you put up 70 points week 1 against really anybody, that's impressive, and that's something that cannot be understated because 70 points is a lot of points. I mean, that is just you're scoring all game long, and I'm pretty sure Ohio State threw a pick 6 and like the first possession of the game. I think it was JT Barrett's first throw. So right off the bat, they're already down 7-0, and then they go up and they score 77 points. I think it was 77-10 or something like that. That is incredible right there, and that's an offense that is going to be very hard to slow down. I don't really want to know what they're going to do to Indiana because that is just scary right there. But for right now, the Buckeyes are number 3 for me.
I'll tell you what, that game against Ohio State for the Hoosiers this year is not really going to look like what it did last year in all likelihood. My number 2, staying in the ACC, is Florida State. And let me just say this to the voters of the AP poll. What did you see out of Clemson this week that you did not see out of Florida State? Clemson, I'll give it to you, they went into a hostile environment, and they scratched out a win, and it was pretty good in the end, and they looked impressive. But Florida State, I mean, they sprinted back to come back and take out Ole Miss, who's a ranked team, mind you, not an Auburn team that went 7-6 who doesn't have a quarterback to save their lives. Florida State, led by Heisman, not leader, but candidate Dalvin Cook, who I think is the second best running back in the nation. Yeah, I said it, behind not Leonard Fournette, but Christian McCaffrey, because Dalvin Cook actually knows how to show up in big games. Waiting for you, Leonard Fournette, Alabama, Wisconsin. He played all right against Wisconsin, but he couldn't do a thing in the first half. Dalvin Cook's the second best running back in the country. He looked like it. He will continue to look like it. And they've got a big matchup against Louisville, which I'm actually going to be at next week. So that'll be very telling to see what Florida State can do. But they looked better than Clemson this week. I don't care what you say. You cannot argue that. Clemson did not look great. Florida State did.
Absolutely, and Florida State is my number 2. It's pretty hard to kind of differ after week one, because there were just some performances that were just so outstandingly good, and I think we're going to have the same number one team because both haven't been mentioned yet. But no, Florida State played really well. Francois, he did not have a good first half. He said it after the game. He needed to get comfortable. He needed some incompletions. Needed to get hit a little bit just to get into the game. And once he did, he looked fantastic. If there weren't so many other Heisman candidates up there, I'd throw him up there. With that second half, that was really impressive, especially as a freshman. It'll be interesting to see kind of how he fares the rest of the season, because if he plays like he did in the first half, Florida State's not going to win very many games. But if he played like he did in the second half, they're going to be very successful this year. And they beat a good Ole Miss team, like you said. So Florida State number 2. I think I know who your number 1 is.
Yeah, they're a clear consensus number 2, and this should come as no surprise for me. My number 1 team for this week is Northwestern. Totally kidding. It's Alabama. Northwestern, we're not even going to talk about them. Embarrassment to the Big Ten. But my number 1 team is Alabama. I don't really think anything needs to be said there. Their quarterback situation is settled. Their defense is still their defense. Their offensive line is still their offensive line without Ryan Kelly. Again, their season is going to hinge on a wild card game against probably Ole Miss, that LSU game in the SEC Championship. It's the same story every single year. I talked about it last week with USC and Alabama. Nothing changes for USC. They're still going to go 8-4, 9-3. Alabama season's still going to hinge on those 2-3 games. So they're everybody's number 1 right now.
Absolutely. What they did to USC was absolutely insane. USC is a program that is a storied program, and they just blatantly wiped the bed with them. It was insane what they did. It was a close game in the first quarter. I thought USC was going to hold them on defense, and then they put in, I don't remember his name, Burns, I think his last name was, at quarterback, and all of a sudden it was 52-6 or 53-6, whatever the final score was. It was an incredible performance, and if they do that in the SEC, which I don't think they will, but that was quite a performance right there.
It was unbelievable, and usually with Alabama, when they get a new quarterback, they look good in week 1 because they always do. But going forward, they just look better and better, and if that's going to be the case this year, I'm horrified to see what's going to happen. It was a pretty interesting week 1, and USC, by the way, is in a complete free fall right now. Clay Helton, why can they not get a good coach? I don't understand that. Why can't they get a coach that can stay for more than 18 games? And why can't they get a coach that knows? Lane Kiffin is succeeding like no other offensive coordinator in the country under Nick Saban. He was a mess at USC. USC can't do anything right as a program right now, as a football program. The other sports are wildly successful. I think they had the second most Olympic medals this year out of any school in the country. So other programs are very successful. I don't mean to bash on USC. Specifically, their football has been completely lost in the past few years. But do we have any honorable mentions that we want to throw out there?
I have 3, and these are all teams that at some point in the season could potentially get into the top 5. My first is Michigan. The reason I did not put them in my top 5 was because I just don't know about their quarterback. Wilton Spate, sure, he put on a good performance, but I didn't even know who he was before Saturday. So that and Michigan has been covered in and out like nobody's business this summer and this spring and throughout the entire time. I had never heard his name. That might have just been me just not paying attention that much because it's been so much Michigan talk. But I didn't know who Wilton Spate was. I feel like I'm not the only one in that boat. So I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen there with Michigan moving forward at the quarterback position. My next 2 are 2 Pac-12 teams. First, Stanford. You have Christian McCaffrey, the best running back in the country, and not just west of the Mississippi, the best running back in the country. You're going to be up there. The plays he can make are just incredible. And the third team, I got to throw Washington in there. They were, sure, Rutgers is terrible, but they're still a Big Ten team, and they still put 48 points up on them. And Washington's offense is not what they're known for. They are supposed to have one of the best defenses in the Pac-12, and yet they still put up 48 points. I named it to kind of put in the back of your mind John Ross. He missed last season with a brutal knee injury. He's back this season. He's a speed demon. He had 3 touchdowns, including a punt return. So this guy's good. And the Huskies play Stanford in a couple weeks on Friday night. I think it's September 30th. So that is must-watch TV.
Stanford's got an absolute gauntlet of a schedule for the first month and a half, month and a week of this college football season, and they didn't look that good. They still won by double digits. I think they covered the spread barely, but they won by double digits. But Christian McCaffrey was not pleased. He was not satisfied. They were never going to lose that game, and I think David Shaw knew that the whole time. But Ryan Burns, their new quarterback, looked all right. He threw some balls on the line. Christian McCaffrey was Christian McCaffrey. He should have had another 100 yards and a touchdown tallied onto his final box score. But they called it back for an absolutely horrifically awful, terrible mistake of, I think, a block in the back. It was ridiculous. They screwed him out of 100 yards and a touchdown. But, we'll discuss that when we're talking about the Heisman in late November. But Stanford's another honorable mention of mine. Excuse me. And I have to agree with you with Michigan. I mean, they ran up the score on a terrible Hawaii team. Don't get me wrong. No offense to Hawaii. They've had some greats in the past like Colt Brennan. But unfortunately, Colt Brennan's in his 30s now. He can't suit up for the Warriors, and they looked awful. And the Wolverines looked great. And Jabril Peppers, I think this guy could end up being SportsCenter could have an entire top 10 on Jabril Peppers plays by the end of November if Michigan's undefeated. I mean, what he's doing, he's an athletic freak. He can play every position, basically any position he wants that's not offensive line, which he hasn't tried. But if he did, I have an odd feeling he would be okay. But I mean, the guy is a complete animal. He's a Swiss Army knife. He's a 5-tool. He can do it all. So those are my two honorable mentions. I can't disagree with you, Stanford and Michigan. And I would like to say Washington because they have a great defense, but I'd like to see a little more out of them against a non-Rutgers team. So when they play Stanford in a couple weeks, that's going to say a lot, and we're going to have a lot of discussion on that, I'm sure. But those are my two honorable mentions.
Absolutely, and I must correct you. It's the Rainbow Warriors, not just the Warriors. Got it in the rainbow for those Hawaiians out there.
Is it rainbow now?
I'm almost positive that they kept. I know it was in there for a while when Norm Chow was the coach. That was just a few years ago, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure I want to say it's the Rainbow Warriors. I still hope it's the Rainbow Warriors.
I feel like it was, and then they got rid of it, and then maybe they brought it back. I feel like there was a period of time where they were just the Warriors.
No, I think you are right on that. I just don't know if they brought it back or not because I know they had some retro jersey for a couple of years, and they were the Rainbow Warriors. I don't know if they still do though.
Who knows? I mean, we could get in touch with them and ask them, but with the time change right now, they're just eating lunch, so we're not going to bother them in the middle of their day. But that'll just about do it for us on not the Hoosier food, but the Hoosier life. I know we couldn't stray away from the food topic today, but it's just so good down here. How can you not? We'll be back next week, back and better than ever. We'll see you guys then. Go Hoosiers. If you're coming to the game against Ball State, check traffic. I'm telling you, you'll thank me later. Find us on Twitter. That's Josh. I still can't. My computer's still acting up with me and not letting me put my Twitter handle, but I'm at M_Dugan44. I'd love to hear from you. Josh, I'd love to hear from you. We're at the Hoosier Life if you want to get to both of us. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for listening.